Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome, if that's not too moot a point, to you all today for today's webinar on arts and heritage funding. And we hope we're going to be able to give you a bit of inspiration today. We're going to talk you through what some of the key funders are currently looking for, and hopefully, generally mop your fevered brow during this time of continued disruption. You may remember last year there was a really interesting piece of research done by the Institute of Fundraising and the University of Sheffield, and they looked at creativity and resilience in the arts and heritage sector. And not a very surprising statistic that came out of that was that 63% of you were feeling overworked, and I think from conversations I've been having recently, 2021 isn't necessarily cutting us any slack in that particular department, but this is a really good moment to start moving out of emergency mode and into how do we become a more sustainable force. And that's a tall order, because it's about envisaging a future, and that's difficult at the moment, but I think it's really essential to have that vision, because without it, it's going to be quite difficult to make an ask and engage with donors. So this is a 45-minute session. I am Sarah Jane O'Neill. I should have said that at the beginning of the webinar. I'm Associate Director and Consultant at the Philanthropy Company. And I'm going to be saying a few words, and then I'm going to pass you on to my colleague, Liz Purchase, who is Senior Consultant for Arts and Heritage. She's going to talk you through the landscape for trusts and foundations fundraising in your sector. And she's going to be particularly looking at the what the Heritage Lottery Fund are now seeking from their criteria. And then I'm also going to move you on to my other colleague, Rebecca Williams, who's our Prospect Research Manager. She's going to be talking about Arts Council England. If you would like to put a question in the chat, you're very welcome to do so. And at the end of the session, I'm going to be fielding those questions and hopefully chipping in. Just a really quick opening kind of point, really, and a sort of a bit of optimism, actually, in terms of major gift fundraising. I think the fear that as the emergency subsided, that the level of gifts would also decline doesn't appear to be being borne out. And there was a really good piece of research recently by the Beacon Collaborative, which showed that in the last quarter, that actually major gifts have not only have actually increased from the first wave of the pandemic, and I think that's really, cause to celebrate. And what was also interesting from that research is that 37% of that group are giving on a quarterly basis in that sort of mid-value spot between £100 and £1,000. So that group that I think is so important to have a strong framework around. And yes, digital fundraising has changed everything. I mean, who knew we would be conversing with our major donors on WhatsApp? I mean, that's what appears to be happening, which is insane. But the fundamental tenet of what we do hasn't changed. We still need a really compelling case for support, and the peer-to-peer approach is still absolutely fundamental. And I think this idea of reimagining your case of support is something that the Philanthropy Company can really help you with and be a very useful external voice, because how we talk about the arts and heritage sector has changed. And hopefully after 4 lockdowns, we've got over this idea that the arts are a nice to have. And actually what we are going to need to do more than ever is to tell a very robust story about our civic value. Who is it that we are helping? What is the impact that we're having? How are we helping our immediate community and local economy? And I think particularly the next generation of donors are going to be viewing philanthropy, cultural philanthropy, through much more of the lens of social justice. And I think this is a theme that will be very much picked up by Liz and Rebecca in what they are saying to you. So I will stop talking now, and I will now pass you over to my colleague Liz. Thank you, Liz.
Hi everybody, thank you Sarah Jane, good morning. Welcome to our look at the current opportunities in funding and what happened last year. So I'm going to start by just quickly looking at how funders responded to the pandemic in 2020 and how things sort of adapted, how flexible and quick funders were to respond. And then I'll go on to look at what the current funding opportunities are with the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the main statutory funders, and a quick look at the UK's major trust and foundation funders. Next slide, please. So the largest kind of impact from funding was of course from government last year, with the response from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport through the Cultural Recovery Fund, which was an incredible 1.57 billion. And we're now in round 3 of that response fund, and that's really been an incredible kind of lifeline to so many arts and heritage organisations and charities across the UK. It was a year of uncharted territory in many ways last year, and each funder responded in its own way. But there was overall an incredible effort and response. As well as the DCMS Cultural Recovery Fund, we saw the National Lottery Heritage Fund adapt and respond really quickly to the emergency. They temporarily paused their main programme of funding and put in place some emergency response funding to really help save many heritage organisations, and I'll go on to look at what the opportunities are in funding with the NLHF in a bit. And then of course the Arts Council England, who also responded really quickly last year and was supporting through organisations through the Cultural Recovery Fund to distribute the government grants. Next slide, please. So in the world of trusts and foundations, who are of course hugely important funders to the arts and heritage sector, some of the big names here I'm sure that you will all recognise: Garfield Weston, Esme Fairbairn, the Monument Trust, etc. As the year progressed, they responded in different ways. They found new ways of working and adapted their previous giving priorities to help applicants during the pandemic, so that they could respond really quickly. Some of them also worked collaboratively with other trusts. They got together. So, for example, the Wolfson Foundation, one of the 4 largest UK funders, partnered with Sherwood Arts, Esme Fairbairn Foundation and the Limbury Trust on a new funding programme, which was called the Live Work Fund, and that offered financial and career support to producers and music creators, individual artists and music creators, so that they could continue to make work and thrive in the face of challenges last year. The London funders coordinated a response, which was the funder's statement on COVID-19. Just to sort of give the top line of what their response was. The statement was about civil society. They said that we know civil society will be a crucial aspect of recovery and renewal for our communities beyond the crisis. And it's important to say that they're not going anywhere. That was the key message. They're on the side of communities and civil society for years ahead. And that message was really key for demonstrating that trusts and foundations were really committed to responding to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So just moving on to look at what the current funding opportunities are. The National Lottery Heritage Fund last year, as I mentioned, responded to COVID-19 with emergency grants and continuing to support their existing grantees. More than ever, their focus is on supporting people and projects. They want to see projects that will benefit communities, be it in health and well-being, developing skills, or creating opportunities for people from different backgrounds to come together. There's also a strong focus on projects that are going to make a difference in helping the local economy recover. Excuse me. So last year they temporarily froze their main grants programme, as I mentioned, which is the heritage grants, and it meant that the big capital projects that many arts and heritage organisations were looking to start had to be put on hold. So as kind of key funders of big capital projects, it meant that back to the drawing board thinking had to kind of happen with museums, galleries, theatres, etc. But now they've actually reopened their main funding for capital grants, which is great news for the sector. And it also means that kind of leveraging with other funding opportunities can start to be planned. So, for example, as a major funder for a capital project for a museum, if they're looking to refurbish a wing of their gallery, of the museum or gallery, the fact that they can now look to applying to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for their kind of key funding means that they can plan better around which other funders that they're going to approach. So the key aspects, as I mentioned, just to recap, that they're looking to fund are projects which will help to boost the local economy, provide job creation and encourage skills development, support local health and well-being, and encourage rebuilding community cohesion. Next slide, please. So the current 3 grant streams that are open with the National Lottery grants for heritage are between 3 and 10,000, 10,000 to 250,000, and then the larger grants, which are between 250,000 to 5 million. You must demonstrate with these projects, if you are to be successful, that a wider range of people will be involved in heritage. That's the mandatory outcome. So every project must achieve at least that one mandatory outcome. There are 8 or 9 others, but that's the one that you must adhere to and plan for if you want to be successful. The 2 smaller amounts, the 2 lower amounts rather, the streams which are between 3,000 and 250,000 don't have a deadline at the moment. They're ongoing, so you can apply it any time. But the larger grants do have quarterly trustee meetings, decision meetings, and the next one is the 25th of August. But they're quarterly, so it's worth checking if you're considering submitting an application, how to plan around that. Next slide, please. I thought it's also worth looking just quickly that the National Heritage Memorial Fund have now opened a COVID-19 response fund. You might think it's a bit late in the day in some ways, but it's great to see that the National Heritage Memorial Fund have started to respond to how we move forward out of the crisis and to supporting heritage organisations. So after a devastating year for many museums, heritage sites across the country, they've now launched this fantastic response fund, and it demonstrates that they're as committed as the National Lottery Heritage Fund to responding to recovery. Applicants from across the UK can apply to the £20 million fund, and that's been made available by DCMS for applicants in England. The funding's available until April 2023, and there are no deadlines for the applications, so it's an open rolling programme of funding. Next slide, please. So, quick look at the current funding opportunities with the UK Trusts and Foundations. Esme Fairbairn are very much still focused on supporting communities. They relaunched their ongoing strategy last year, so they now have an open programme of funding, and they, after a sort of a year of thinking about how they would respond following the pandemic, they've reopened and continuing their strategy to support communities and people. They don't offer capital funds, but you can include costs of your project within an application. The Paul Hamlyn Fund, the Paul Hamlyn Foundation have again a very strong focus on supporting communities and people, and their Arts Access and Participation Fund means that applicants can apply for a grant between 30,000 and 400,000. The Wolfson Foundation relaunched their 2 main funding streams last year. One is for individuals, the other, which is funding for places, is the one that museums, galleries, arts organisations would look to apply to. Funding for Places is an open programme, and they do offer capital support. The Garfield Weston Foundation, again, one of the 4 largest UK funders, they have an open funding programme again, and they also offer capital support. So it's worth weaving into your fundraising plan, at least kind of considering how these larger trusts and foundations will sort of sit in your overall funding strategy. So that's just a quick run through, look at what the funding opportunities are. There's of course many questions that I'm sure some of you will have. There's specific details that we're happy to answer, and look at how we can sort of shape your fundraising strategy or plans around how to approach Trust and Foundation and the main UK funders. Thank you very much, and back to you, Sarah Jane.
We're going to move on to Rebecca, and then if we do some questions after that, does that sound good?
Thanks very much, Liz. Next slide, please, James. Fab. Okay, so I'm just going to be running us through current funding opportunities with the Arts Council England. I will be covering their strategic aims, their priorities at the moment, and just some practicalities of making application at the moment. So their current strategy is a 10-year strategy which runs from 2020 to 2030. It's called Let's Create, and the 3 priority areas are creative people. They're looking here for projects that promote everyone's opportunity to be involved in the arts and express creativity throughout their lives. The second is create cultural communities. So we're looking at villages, towns and cities thriving through collaborative culture. And the final is a creative and cultural. They're looking for projects here that include cultural, focusing on innovation, collaboration, also an international focus there. Thanks. Next slide, please. So at the moment, you can apply for project grants, but capital grants are currently paused, and there is some supplementary guidance which applies until August 2021. So this is in light of COVID. So if you are applying for project grants at the moment, this is what the Arts Council are focusing on. So they're looking particularly for applications from individual creative practitioners, projects which focus on research and development. So if you have projects which incorporate some future planning, that's appealing for the Arts Council at the moment. Organisational development activity, projects that bear in mind the government's guidelines for COVID restrictions and roadmap out of lockdown. So running cultural and creative projects that take into account the current guidance. And activity that closely aligns with equality objectives, so promoting equal opportunities to engage in the arts. Next slide, please. So how will your applications be assessed? So there are 4 main criteria. They are quality, public engagement, finance and management. Just to take each one at a time. So quality, they're looking at the quality of your work, promoting excellence in the arts. Also the creative case for diversity. So they're particularly looking for projects which promote diversity and inclusion in the creative process. If you're applying for over 50k, then you'll want to consider the impact on the wider sector as well. Public engagement. So for this, we're considering who you're engaging with your project. Why are you engaging with these people? Are they specific groups? And how will you reach them? It's particularly beneficial if your project involves people that wouldn't usually be involved in the arts or wouldn't usually be able to participate in the creative process. Finance is, of course, having a robust and comprehensive budget. At the moment, you don't need to have a 10% match funding requirement. That's been suspended until the end of August. And management, you're going to be looking at things like, are there any partners involved in your project? How will you be monitoring and evaluating the project? And again, if you're applying for over £50,000, you'll want to give some consideration to what the risks might be of your project and how you might mitigate against those risks. If you do want to apply for over £100,000, you must ask for permission. There's a permission form available on the ACE website. They do give grants over £1,000 in exceptional circumstances, but you would have to demonstrate national significance. So if you do want to go for over £1,000, you should be looking at national activities, and an EOI, an expression of interest, would be the first step if you were going to apply at that level. A couple of key considerations for those larger grants would be include, is there a digital or technology element that you can demonstrate? And you definitely want to be able to demonstrate some strong partnerships at that level. And next slide, please, James. I think we're over to questions with Sarah Jane.
Thank you so much. I'm just having a look in the chat, and I haven't seen any questions yet. So if I just have a little bit more and you can see if you've got anything that you want to pose to us. And I really wanted to kind of wrap up with the kind of 3 areas that we are being told by clients that they really need external help on. And those, broadly speaking, are what is the story that we are telling? How do we refresh that story and make it relevant for now? And critically, how do we build a consensus around that? The second area is, who are we telling that story to? And I think it's true to say, particularly with individual donors, that over the past 18 months, pipelines have really depleted because of the lack of face-to-face, particularly with major gifts. And also because, quite understandably and rightly, people have been focusing on the donors that they already have. And the flip side of that is the well really does need replenishing. And as we know, that's a very time-consuming thing to do. And it's an area of work that we do a lot of at the Philanthropy Company. We've been working most recently with the ENO, Garsington Opera and the Africa Centre to really help them boost the groups of people that they are approaching. And then the third area is, how do you connect with those people? I quite often hear from fundraisers, I don't have anyone to do a peer-to-peer ask, or I don't have enough people, or I don't have the buy-in or the understanding of what I do. And that's another area that we can help with in terms of training trustees and senior volunteers, and really helping you with the nuts and bolts of building your development board, whether that's creating an ethical policy for you, due diligence, creating a memorandum of understanding, helping you identify and interview the right people that can help and speak for you. And an example of somebody that we've worked with recently very successfully is Saffron Hall. Saffron Hall is a performance space in the grounds of Saffron Walden County High School, and they came to us just before the pandemic kicked off. We wanted a very broad ranging piece of work which consisted of prospect research, a case for support, and also they wanted us to put together a bid for the Paul Hamlin Foundation. Obviously, we would normally do face-to-face, we would do a site visit, we would do face-to-face consultations, but we moved everything very quickly online and were able to do all of that work for them and create a very compelling, overarching case for support for them over many Zooms and many shared documents, and working particularly closely with their learning and participation director so that we could ensure that the strong messaging that you need for your trust and foundations applications were really woven into that case for support, and that it was fully aligned with their vision and mission statements. So whilst we desperately miss the face-to-face interaction like you, but we have been able to be dexterous enough to really make that transition. And it's worth saying actually that we're a network of 70 consultants. So we have a core team of 8, and when you work with us, it's very much working with a core team of skills. And if we don't necessarily have the skill that you are looking for, we can find somebody in our network who does, and that encompasses everything from digital to legacy to corporate. So I'm looking at the chat box and you're all very, very quiet. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I actually have a question. I'm going to put you on the spot, guys, see if you can answer this. Something that I'm quite interested in myself. In terms of T&F Foundation fundraising, obviously one of the things that has changed has been this idea of having, less onerous reporting to grantees and more flexibility. Do you think that's something that is going to continue going forward, or do you see us moving back to the kind of the old ways of doing things? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Who wants to go first?
Liz, I'm looking at you.
I think there's going to be some important learnings that will be taken forward from last year with trusts and foundations. They're obviously looking more than ever to respond to how projects will help people and communities. So arts organisations and heritage sector organisations and sites will have to look more than ever at a strong learning and participation programme, for example, or how they're going to sort of plan to widen participation to reach non-traditional audiences. So I think some of the sort of the outcomes from last year will certainly be a taking forward of how to adapt to support people, and that's going to be a key consideration for the criteria of applying to grants. I don't think that that's going to be changing anytime soon. I mean, really, if you look at the sort of strategic approach of both the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Arts Council, it's both very much about kind of grassroots support at the smaller, the lower end of the grants, up to the big applications, continuing to bring in the community and people. So across the piece with National Lottery Heritage Fund, it will continue to be very much focused on how you can bring people in to appreciate the heritage that's on their doorstep that they may have felt previously was not for them. I think coming out of the pandemic, coming out of lockdown, it's going to be sort of really important for organisations to think about how to bring people in so that they can participate and benefit from the heritage sites in their area. I mean, there's a wealth of kind of research that's been done to demonstrate the impact of enjoying and taking part in heritage sites and heritage activities at those sites on well-being. So health and well-being is a central kind of aspect of what people can get out of participating in the amazing sites that are on their doorstep, castles, Roman sites, whatever it is in the local area. There'll be evidence to show that taking part and visiting those sites is really great for people's mental health and well-being. I think coming out of last year, that's going to be more important than ever.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think when you think about what the next pandemic may be, it may be a mental health pandemic. And actually, in many ways, the arts and heritage sector have a really rich seam to plough in that, in terms of they are the bringers of joy, really. They have been the people that have created, a distraction throughout this situation in terms of people's anxiety and trauma and boredom, and they've got a really, really strong story to tell. I have got a question here, I think. With the rise of digital over the last year, are you aware of any funders who are willing to invest in and support venues? Oh, is that half a question? With the rise of digital over the last year, are you aware of any funders who are specifically funding that area of work?
There's lots of opportunities for funding out there, projects associated sort of project costs with digital. Paul Hamlin certainly will be very sort of interested in an application which develops a digital aspect. The Foyle Foundation, they will help organisations to kind of develop their digital reach. So in fact, you can include in an application to the current funding stream of the Foyle Foundation, you can include kind of the larger sort of costs associated with rolling out a digital project. That might be delivering streaming services or digital content for a learning and participation programme. I think you know, those are the kind of key kind of UK funders, but there'll be also lots of trusts and foundations at the kind of more the smaller, more local trusts and foundations that will consider an application which includes an element of digital, as long as it's about bringing in people, widening participation, developing and excelling at delivering your work through digital means. So that's down to kind of the prospect research element, which I'm sure, you know, is something that you've considered with your fundraising teams, something that we've certainly helped many clients with, and continuing to support clients with their prospect research. Digital is sort of part and parcel, I think, of an overarching approach to widening access. So it's not just the thing in itself that trusts and foundations will look to support. I think ultimately, if your project is a digital project, it would be for them the investment in people and how different generations, different cultural backgrounds, people from different cultural backgrounds, a wide range of people in the communities that you sort of serve and that you benefit will be able to sort of take part where they've not been able to before. That might be an intergenerational project where grandchildren are supporting their grandparents to work with digital or social media so that they can share their stories, their heritage stories, which will then sort of go to enhance maybe a museum or a heritage site's interpretation and their package of sort of learning and participation. So it's certainly, I think, a kind of key project aspects that trusts will be looking to support. Yes.
Just to add to what Liz has said, the Arts Council also have a specific guidance on digital, so do have a look at that. You can incorporate that into your projects. And as Liz said, when thinking about adapting to COVID, any funders that are looking for considerations or adapting your services, a lot of those will be about digital and moving things onto online. I believe Comic Relief also have a social tech fund, so take a look at that. And also a lot of the corporate foundations support digital in the arts, so I'm thinking of Bloomberg and some of the banks, so also worth a look at those.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So the next question here is about evidencing need and impact. So can you outline a good place to start when you're trying to build, you know, stronger data to evidence the need and impact of a project, you know, before you start writing an application? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of that.
Before you start writing an application, and obviously you're thinking about how you are going to collect the data that illustrates the impact. Have you got any ideas on what a good starting point for that is?
Yes. I think engagement with your stakeholders from the beginning is really crucial, and demonstrating that you're really kind of planning to deliver a project which engages everybody locally. So, for example, forming a group which will be made up of local people and who sort of represent different groups. So it could be a stakeholder group from that represents your local church, the school, perhaps a women's group, refugee group, young people's advisory group. bringing together different voices from the community into sort of a group of worker bees, maybe, let's call them, who will bring their knowledge and views of what works best for that community into your planning for a project. And will also kind of act to be ambassadors or spokespeople for the project, so that when you actually come to deliver it, you've got kind of supporters on the ground that you sort of cultivated those relationships with. So perhaps think about doing a couple of sessions where you convene a group and ask them some critical questions about what they want to get out of the project. And then from their responses, you could sort of look to doing a survey to a wider group within the community. So once you've gathered the kind of questions that you think, the questions that they would like to ask the wider community about what a heritage or arts project would look like for them, you could then take that set of questions that they've given to you, produce a survey, and then from the survey, you'll bring together more voices from a wider range of people, and you can start to sort of demonstrate in your application that you're planning around their responses. So you're not just producing a project, you're not just planning a project which is the benefits of your site, but it's also deliberately sort of planned around benefiting your local community.
Thank you so much. Sorry, and I do apologise, everybody, because I am actually struggling to read questions, if you're wondering why I'm slightly stumbling. So I will do my best to see what I can see. I do have a question here that's for Rebecca, and I just wondered if you had any sense of what percentage of applications for the Arts Council are being accepted at the moment. Do you get a sense of that?
Gosh, no, I think they're reluctant to put out a percentage figure. I would just say it's highly competitive, and it's changing all the time. So it's very competitive. Don't rush. Put in a really fully considered application rather than race to the end. And keep an eye on the website, because the guidance is likely to change again after August.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Is anyone able to access the questions on the panel? Because I just don't want to not answer anybody, but I am not able to see them. Are you able, guys? Are you able to see them? No. Okay. I'm not sure that we have lots of questions. Oh, there's 7. I'm just wondering, actually, James, are you able just to quickly send those over to me so I can make sure, because I think we've only answered 3 or 4 so far. Do apologise, everybody. Oh yes, actually,
might be if I read them out, Sarah Jane, or can you see them now?
James.
Okay, so taking from the top, a question from Sarah Owen. So NHMF, a fund of last resort still in the current climate. How far are TNFs willing to be a part of the big mix, e.g. with up to 10 other foundations? Their upper limits are not sufficient for us to fund a project with only 1 or 2 of them. I think that would be to the panel.
Yes, I think with the mix of trusts and foundations, it depends on the scale of your project and the size of grants that you're looking for. The NLHF look for you to sort of have at least a 10% contribution to the project, which, depending on, this is just an example of how they might look to sort of balance or leverage the contribution that you will make as your sort of investment to the project. And I think this kind of reflects maybe across the piece, really. So with the smaller projects, they would probably look for amounts which are a bigger ask, if you like. So they will understand that organisations which have perhaps less funding, less resources, looking to deliver a smaller project, more of a grassroots kind of cultural project, they will perhaps consider the weighting to be for their kind of contribution to the project to be higher. So, you know, if you're looking to deliver a project which costs £10,000, they would look to, you know, maybe fund half of that. But with the larger grants, it just starts to change slightly, and you know, you might want to consider an ask which reflects that, because obviously trusts and foundations have a kind of a maximum amounts, and typical ranges is, you know, sort of 50 to 250,000 for a medium range capital project. So with that in mind, I think if you have, you know, you're applying to for the UK's largest trust and foundation funders, balancing your total ask from them against your kind of seed funding or your kind of core public funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, or your sort of big ask to the Memorial Fund. If that makes sense, I'm not sure if that sort of helps, if that's clear. But I think overall, just to sort of bear in mind that you know, the proportion of your trust and foundations ask will be relevant to, or in the context of your project cost, and how much you're going to approach National Lottery Heritage Fund for.
Thank you, Liz. I've got another question that's come in, which I think is very interesting. They're saying, be keen to hear from the panel on their thoughts on how larger institutions can secure funding, because obviously a lot of funds seem to be being aimed towards grassroots organisations, and then there's a cap on organisations with income over a certain amount, you know, say 2 million. So, but large institutions are really struggling with significant overheads. So I just wondered what our thoughts were on that.
Sorry, it just broke up. Sorry, could you just
cut out? No problem. I'll just quickly just rephrase that. So it's all about what's the advice for larger institutions for securing funding, because the trend seems to be moving more towards let's fund grassroots, but obviously large organisations have got really significant overheads and very significant problems. So did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that really for the larger heritage grants, obviously National Lottery Heritage Fund is a key consideration, and bear in mind that it's a 3-stage process for the larger grants. It starts with an expression of interest, which you can submit at any time, so there's no deadlines. You can put in your expression of interest. It's a rolling open application process, and it's only sort of a two-sided, 2 to 3 sides of A4 form, and they come back to you within 4 to 6 weeks, I think it is. You might want to check that, but it's a fairly quick turnaround, basically. And what I'd say is that at that stage, at the expression of interest stage, you already want to be really sort of clear about your fundraising plan, what your outcomes will be, what the impacts for people and communities will be of your project. You should really have already thought about who you will work with, so partners. Start thinking straight away about other local museums, heritage organisations that you can partner with to support the outcomes. I mean, I'm not saying that you necessarily want to go into partnership per se on the bid itself, but just think about maybe the learning and participation department of a museum in the next town can provide something that can help you improve your interpretation in a way that you couldn't. So you might want to partner with them when you come to planning your activities, which will be a document you actually have to submit with your round one application if you're successful at the expression of interest stage. So I suppose overall what I'm trying to say is that really have from the beginning a clear plan about how you're going to deliver your project at the expression of interest stage. So with those larger projects, which are 250,000 to 5 million, you can have a sort of a stronger chance. You're going to be more competitive because obviously the expression of interest stage will determine, if you're successful, will determine whether they invite you to apply for the full round one phase. So if you have all your ducks in a row and you've planned really well already, at that point you will have a more competitive bid.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. Anything else to add to that, Rebecca? I'm conscious of time. I think we've got about a minute to go.
Yeah, no, I think Liz summed that up perfectly. I was going to point to opportunities for partnerships with those grassroots organisations. So I think Liz covered that off.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely to have you this morning. I hope you're not too sweltering. We will follow up with an email. I think slides might be available if that's going to be helpful to you. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.